can start. Thank you so much.
All right, welcome everyone to this Wits Business School Leadership Dialogue. This afternoon, we have the privilege to have our guest, Lesetja Kganyago, who is the governor of the South African Reserve Bank. Before we start, I would like to invite the Vice Chancellor and the Principal of the University of the Witwatersrand, Professor Zebulon Vilakazi, to welcome our guest and to introduce him to our audience. Over to you, Vice Chancellor.
Thank you, Professor Soko, Professor Morris Hadebe, head of the business school, our man of the moment for today, Governor Lesetja Kganyago, of whom we'll hear more about in a short while, organizing team, ladies and gentlemen, and guests. It's my pleasure to greet you today. And I'm particularly pleased that this afternoon we'll be introducing our special guest who will illuminate us on some of the key topical issues that are vexing to this day. I also would want to take a short moment to acknowledge the import of the work being done through this series and other programs run through this business school, not only just for the university, because I noted that some of the guests who will be part of this audience here are beyond the boundaries of the university. And I think it behoves of a university of the centrality, strength, and the leadership of the school like this one to actually be right front and center in all the dialogues. And the school is living true to its mission critical mandate. Prof. Soko, you and your team have put together a much needed series of conversations with influential and, most importantly, courageous people in this moment. We need, beyond anything else, courage. A term derived from French means having a heart to say things that are uncomfortable, but will take us there as a country. And I think none other than our today's guest speaker is a true exemplar of that kind of courageous leadership that is needed in the 21st century in this country. I think what we are doing here is unearthing the philosophies and principles that drive the actions we see in the public space, while advancing the paradigm of our excellence as Africans in this continent, and also the excellence we see among us, amidst sometimes the debilitating manifestations of mediocrity that actually do not give a true reflection of what this country and this continent can do. And for that, I'd like to say well done, and I thank you. Now, to the guest for today, a leader who embodies one of the key objectives we as Wits here take as close to our core. It is development of excellent graduates who leave a mark in society. Yes, notwithstanding the fact that the governor did not pass through the walls of this institution, but he certainly is a fine example of what is meant by leaders who leave their mark on society through nothing but a quest for excellence that radiates to society. He's one of the most senior and longest serving South African public officials, and one of the very few people globally who master both fiscal and monetary policy. In his previous role as a DG of the National Treasury, Director General, and currently as our country's central banker, he has played a pivotal role in steering the South African economy through periods of instability, turbulence, and also moments of irrationality in some other areas. I'll say that myself. It is through the people of such measurement, dignity, clarity of thought that today we have an economy we can still be proud of. Nobody is more knowledgeable or qualified to talk about the challenges of our national economy than our guest speaker today. It is thus a unique privilege to honor and introduce him as Professor Milford Soko's conversant guest at our business school. Just a bit about about the governor in terms of his background is that he was, as I mentioned earlier, reappointed as the governor of the South African Reserve Bank for the second term in November 2019, after completing his first term, 5-year term, which ended on the 9th of November 2014. He has been a deputy governor of SARB, as our Reserve Bank is known, since May 2011. In his role, he was responsible for a wide range of areas, including research, financial stability, and bank supervision. He also has led in the financial regulatory reform, including the Twin Peaks regulatory structure, something that can be explained to some of us later. He has been central in driving financial surveillance, including an all-important task of taking responsibility for the regulation of cross-border flows, among others. He has more than 20 years of experience in formulating and implementing public policy. Having spent time at the Central Bank and at the National Treasury, it is during this time at the National Treasury that the fundamental reform of the management of the national debt portfolio was completed, and he successfully steered several public finance and financial market reforms. He has led the South African technical team in various G20 Ministers of Finance and Central Bank Governors meetings and summits, including the inaugural summit of 2018. Among other global roles he has played in being a representative of South Africa has been to chair the IMF World Bank Development Committee of Deputies and the G20 Working Group on IMF governance reforms. These are the highest levels of global governance that anyone can play. And to have a South African, our own, representing us in these Olympics of central governance is something that you should not take lightly. He also served as the Vice Chair of the Financial Stability Board Standing Committee on Standards and Implementation for 4 years. He currently chairs the Committee of Central Bankers of Southern African Development Community and also co-chairs the Financial Stability Board's Regional Consultative Group for Sub-Saharan Africa. He also chairs the Financial Stability Board Standing Committee on Standards and Implementation. As I close, I have to mention that he chaired the International Monetary and Fiscal Committee, IMFC, from Jan 2018 to December 2013. This is the primary advisory body of the IMF, International Monetary Fund, Board of Governors, and deliberates on core and principal policies of this important Bretton Woods institution. Kganyago holds a Master of Science degree in Developmental Economics from the University of London, the SOAS, that we as Wits are all aware of, where the former Vice Chancellor is now Director, and a Bachelor of Commerce degree in Accounting and Economics from the University of South Africa. As I hand back to Professor Soko, I remember recently Governor Kganyago saying that the effects of the pandemic and the hope for economic discovery are not for us to, it's not this time of us to despair. This is a time for us to look at the future beyond the pandemic. This, I could not agree with him more. I too believe in reaching for what is seemingly unattainable, difficult to achieve, and hard to grasp in the moment of a crisis. Over to you, Professor Soko, and I look forward to this, what will be a very insightful and exciting conversation. And I thank you.
Thank you again, Vice Chancellor, Professor Vilakazi, for joining us this afternoon to introduce our guest. My name is Soko. I'm a professor of international business and strategy here at Wits Business School. It is my pleasure to host today's event. Earlier this year, our head of school, Professor Maurice Hadebe, introduced a new series of events called the Wits Business School Leadership Dialogues. It is on this platform that we invite top leaders in the public and private sectors, as well as academia, to share their views on leadership, business and industry, and to share perspectives on some of the pressing challenges that we are facing as a nation, as well as a continent. It is a real honor to welcome Governor Kganyago, and we are delighted that he's able to take time out of his busy schedule to chat to us this afternoon. Before we start today's conversation, a few house rules. Firstly, if your microphone is on, please mute it now. Also, please switch off your video. This will help with any connectivity issues you may have. If you'd like to ask any questions, please type them in the chat box and I will relay them to our guest. Please don't put up your hand or use any other means of communicating. Just use the chat box. In case you miss anything, this event is being live streamed and recorded. So we begin. Good afternoon, Governor. How are you today?
Good afternoon, Mills.
The first question I'd like to ask you is about your personal background. You grew up in the village of Maribana in Limpopo and attended the school under the tree in the 1970s. Could you please share with us what it was like, growing up in the village, and who your childhood influences were during that time?
Thanks, Mills. I had a fairly interesting childhood because, I was actually born here in Alexander,
yes,
township. And during those days, if you were born in the township here, under the past laws, you had special privileges. You qualified for something called Section 10(1)A, which would allow you to work in the urban areas without having to go back to the village. Well, my late father and mother concocted something, and with a friend made sure that my pregnant mother was over this side. Apparently, during those days, pregnant women were not allowed on the train because the government figured out why they were getting on the train to make sure that the kids are born this side. But I went to the village, back to the village at the age of 6 and started schooling there. Those early days, the biggest influencer was actually my grandmother, who was an excellent storyteller. It only took me years as one started to deal with strategy and all of these things that that storytelling could actually be used. And so actually, even when I communicate with my team, if I do not tell them a story, they think that my speech is incomplete. And I pull stories from the African bush, and I use them in communicating in fairly simple language, complex topics. And hopefully today, as we converse here, I succeed in decongesting the discussions around economics as well.
Now, Governor, when you were appointed as governor, one of the things you did was to go to your village, where you went on a shopping spree, it seems. You went about buying meal, sugar, cooking oil, using the new banknotes that were bearing your signature. Could you explain to us, why you did that? What was the significance of that gesture to you? When
we were growing up, South Africa had a death penalty. And the one thing that we convinced ourselves, if somebody had been sentenced to death, was that, no, they are not quite dead. Because remember, the state would execute the person and keep the remains. And so we came to the conclusion that all the people who have been sentenced to death are working at a money-making factory. And so part of it going back to that village was to say to the villagers, come on, let's demystify this. Here we are, we could do this. Secondly was that I felt it was an opportunity to teach people about the value of money. And I went back to the same shop where every morning I would go and buy bread. And I found the wife of the shopkeeper there. And she remembers that I used to come and knock at her house because the shop is not open, because I must buy bread before I go to school. There was an important inflation lesson, because at the time that I would go to that, we would buy a loaf of bread for 10 cents. And I was saying to the villagers, today you cannot get a loaf of bread for 10 cents. You cannot even get it for 10 rands. And I said, what had happened, because the size of the bread is still the same. And I said to them, therein lies the lesson of inflation. The reason why today we need so much money to buy a loaf of bread that we were buying for 10 cents in 1972 is exactly that. That understand that the reason why we have to keep inflation in check is because inflation is the value of your money. That the money that you have buys a shrinking basket of goods and services. And I think that the message had gotten through. When I got there, I mean, I had 380 rands to spend. And there was a reason why it is 380 rands. All the banknotes in South Africa, the 10 rands, 20, 50, 100, and 200, they make together 380 rands. And so I had to spend with all of those banknotes. I think that there was some change of a few cents after I had done that. But the important thing for me going there, besides the fact that I wanted to say to young people, you could have grown up in this village just like me, and that you could go out there and make it. And I said to them, there is one distinguishing factor. And I said that people who are come from the villages, who are today successful professionally, had something in common. They took advantage of the opportunities offered through education. That was a message that was basically saying that invest in education. We must invest as a nation in the education of our children, because that is the game changer between those who took advantage of education and those who didn't take advantage of education.
Now, I want to come to the issue of the mandate of the bank shortly, but before I do that, I would like to ask you a question about a statement you made previously, in which you described the job of being governor as scary. You said this was a very scary job. I would like you to explain what you meant by that, and also maybe explain what exactly you do on a day-to-day basis, because South Africans, when they see you when you announce interest rates, and they don't know, and it disappears. They don't know what happens beyond that. You know, if you could just explain why you said the job is scary, and also, you know, on a typical day, what exactly does the governor of the Reserve Bank do?
You know, as a deputy governor in July 2011, I was going into my first MPC meeting. A day before a decision was made, I think I woke up at like 1 o'clock and I couldn't sleep. And the reason I couldn't sleep was a very simple one. I had come in as a DG from being a DG of the Treasury. As a DG of the Treasury, you can put the budget together. You will take it with the minister to cabinet. At the end of the day, it is the cabinet's decision. No one could come and say that you did this or you did that. You go to cabinet, you give cabinet the options, you go with this, you go with that, you go, and it is cabinet's decision. Why I didn't sleep when on that day of the MPC was because once the decision is made, I can't say that that decision was made by cabinet. What was scary was that it is now my decision. Of course, with the other MPC members, but it is my decision, and it is that big that is scary. But it also becomes particularly scary because, you know, South Africans, we hate losing. We believe we should win, and it is not unusual for us to fire the coach of this sporting coach or that sporting coach because the national team is not doing well, and so as you make decisions as a governor, whether it is decisions with respect to monetary policy or bank licensing or putting a bank under curatorship or any of those things, you know that there are 60 million South Africans about who all think that they know what was the correct thing that you should have done. And that puts a lot of pressure on you, and you think of the responsibility that you are carrying. But importantly, is that the decisions that we make as a central bank are decisions that touches and affect millions of South Africans, even where some of them might not even know what it is. And it is for that reason that as a central bank, with a price stability mandate that emanates from the Constitution, that we need to constantly reassure South Africans that the mandate that they have tasked us with is in good hands, and that we will live true to that mandate. And I keep on saying that we have got to thank the authors of our Constitution. The authors of our constitutions, they were really good students of history, in that when they decided that we are going to task the central bank with this mandate of price stability, that for that to be executed effectively, it meant that you must give the central bank the instruments and the independence to be able to pursue its mandate. And that is what actually constantly reminds us. And as I say, in this institution, you know, there are some 2,000 honest South Africans, good South Africans who wake up every day making sure that this institution meets the responsibility that South Africans have tasked us with, which is that of preserving the value of money.
Now, Governor, the mandate is clearly stated in the Constitution, and it says the primary objective of the bank shall be to protect the value of the currency of the Republic in the interest of balanced and sustainable economic growth in the Republic. I would like you to expand on that. You have already started talking about that, but if you could just expand and perhaps tell us, you know, if there's any difference between the mandate of the Reserve Bank and the mandates of other central banks in the world. For instance, I'm looking here at the Fed in the US. It says the mission of the board is to foster the stability, integrity, and efficiency of the nation's monetary, financial, and payment systems, as so as to promote optimal macroeconomic performance. And then I'll use also the Reserve Bank of India, which says to foster monetary and financial stability conducive to sustainable economic growth and to ensure the development of an efficient and inclusive financial system. Is there, you know, any nuances there, any differences between the mandate of the bank and those of other banks in the world?
You know, central banks are creatures of the society they are in. Society creates institutions and gives them particular responsibility. The one thing common across the central banks is that it doesn't matter whether there are all these other things put in. All central banks have got one thing in common. They have got a responsibility for price stability. Now, we in the South African Reserve Bank have got a price stability mandate. But because you have correctly read, the authors of our Constitution knew that price stability is not an end in itself. It is a prerequisite for something else. And they understood that for us to have balanced and sustainable growth in the Republic, you actually needed price stability. But the Constitution goes further. The clauses that follow up in the Constitution says that, and the central bank shall do such other things as are ordinarily done by other central banks, provided they are spelled out in a national piece of legislation subject to the primary object of the bank. So the Financial Sector Regulations Act in 2017 gave us the responsibility for financial stability. So now the central bank must do financial stability, but that financial stability responsibility of the central bank is subject to our primary mandate. And our primary mandate is that of price stability. We have got the National Payment Systems Act. And in terms of the National Payment Systems Act, the South African Reserve Bank must run a national payment system. If you ask yourself, when you withdraw money from an ATM or you swipe your credit card and all of that, the reason you are able to do that is that at the back, it is the national payment system that is run by the South African Reserve Bank. We also have a responsibility to make sure that we protect depositors and policyholders. And that is done in terms of the Financial Sector Regulations Act, in terms of the Banks Act, and in terms of the Insurance Act, to make sure that when you are a user of financial services, that the institution that had made a commitment to you is able to meet that commitment. So we have got that primary mandate, but we have got other functions that under central bank, or as the Constitution says, we have got other functions that are ordinarily done by other central banks, and they get spelled out in these pieces of legislation that we are administering as the South African Reserve Bank.
Right. I've got other questions, Governor, from the audience. So as we proceed, I will squeeze those in. And this one is from M to everyone. And it says that, Mr. Governor, somebody is interested in understanding, how, let me just see, what it takes for somebody to become a governor of the Reserve Bank. Young people who aspire to become like yourself, what is it that they need to do, to achieve what you've achieved?
Well, firstly, I think the young people have to take advantage of opportunities offered to education. And at least today, young people could look at us and say that, oh, there is the governor, I would like to be like them. I never dreamt that one day I would be a governor. I never dreamt that I would work for the South African government. If anything, during those days, I was interested in the South African government falling, right? So now today, we can look at this and say that we have got a common destiny as a nation, and we could build these things. So young people, for me, have got a responsibility, and their responsibility is to learn and master a body of knowledge. And the world is moving so fast these days. And it used to be that for you to enter a central bank, you just had to be in economics and so forth. But now today, central banks are having to employ data scientists. We are having to employ actuaries and the lot. And that is because of the fast-changing nature of the financial system, importantly, which then also changes the world of central banking. And it's important that young people engage with those. We do run programs, by the way. We are rated as one of the top 5 companies in the country that young people would like to work for. Well, that means that competition to get into the Reserve Bank is very stiff. Yeah, and that opportunity is there. We run these programs, whether it is our graduate recruitment program and so forth. We do all of those. And it is very important that young people continue to engage in education.
Right. I have another question, Governor, from Ketelo, which is a question related to the mandate of the bank. And Ketelo wants to know why the focus is limited to price stability, though. Why not focus on unemployment? And this echoes a criticism that has been made by organizations like COSATU, Governor, that the bank has a too restrictive a mandate by virtue of its primary focus on inflation. Perhaps could you please expand on that? Because this question keeps coming up, especially with us in South Africa being a country that is characterized by such vast, socio-economic inequalities. Is the focus on inflation sufficient? That's the question from Ketela.
It's not sufficient. Like I said, we need balanced and sustainable growth in the Republic. Inflation is price stability is a necessary condition for that growth. But it is by no way a sufficient condition for growth. And it is important to distinguish, in understanding growth, to distinguish between two very important aspects. Monetary policy can only affect what is called cyclical growth. It will not affect structural growth. And it's important to distinguish that. The horizon of monetary policy is a 12 to 18-month horizon. And so we can affect short-run growth. What you actually need for an economy to have balanced and sustainable growth is to raise what we call the potential growth rate of the economy. And what is that potential growth rate of the economy? It is a growth rate which we also have to watch very closely as a central bank, that if there is a deviation, sustained deviation from that growth, whether it is below, whether the cyclical growth is below potential, in which case monetary policy has to stimulate to take growth to that potential. But if potential is too low, which the central bank does not control, and the economy grows above potential, then you have got the problem of too much money chasing too few goods, and then you have got an inflation problem, and then you have got to rein the economy back. I have a friend who explains potential growth this way. He says that potential growth is like the speed limit on the road. And if you drive faster than the speed limit, the chances are that you could even lose your life or very soon have an appointment with the courts because you have broken the speed limit. If you drive below the speed limit, the chances are that you will reach your destination later than you would have otherwise had reached it. And so economists then, thus, we look at both the potential growth rate of the economy and the cyclical growth rate of the economy. And what the central banks are better able to influence and control is the cyclical growth. And unless the policies, other policies in government are put in place to raise the potential growth of the economy, you will not. Beating up the central bank is not going to create that higher growth rate that we actually require. Since we are at Wits today, virtually so, let me say to you that there is nothing monetary policy can do to produce the engineers that the country needs in order to grow. We cannot produce PhDs with monetary policy, but we can affect cyclical growth. We need, for us to raise the potential growth of this economy, to raise the investment stock in the economy and the human capital in the thing. You chaps, that is what you do in creating the human capital that the economy needs in order to grow. Hopefully I have explained this in a manner that everyone would understand.
All right, Governor, I have another question from Ntombero, which I also wanted to ask. And these questions, I know you've heard them before and you've tried to address them in the past, but you've got to keep asking them because these are questions that occupy the minds of many South Africans who want to understand how the bank functions. And this question relates to the ownership of the bank, which is, the bank is one of the few banks in the world with private shareholders, and there's been a big debate about whether it should be nationalized or not. Some of your critics, like the economic freedom fighters, have been at the forefront of that debate. For our benefit, and Temberu's asked this question, could you please tell us what your response as a bank is to this criticism or to this clamor for nationalization? And also explain to us, if the bank were to be nationalized, would that change anything? Would that make any difference, in terms of the role that it plays? Does it matter that who the shareholders are? If for the benefit of those who want to know this.
Well, the discussion about nationalization it's like a zombie debate, and it doesn't matter how much you explain, it will just keep on coming. Actually, as the central bank, we have said everything that needs to be said on this, and that is for the politicians to make a decision on this. All that we had asked was, as you do that, just understand, the mandate of the central bank is not set by the shareholders. The mandate of the central bank had been set by us South Africans, is in the covenant that we had signed, which is the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. And in a way, this discussion about nationalization is a 200,000 rands discussion, because the shareholders are 2 million. The South African Reserve Bank Act says that the shareholders can only get dividends of 10 cents per share. 10 cents of the 2 million is 200,000. That's all the shareholders get, 200,000. They have got no influence on monetary policy. They have got no influence on financial regulatory policy. They have got no influence on financial stability. They have got no influence on the payment system, nothing. There is a history to it, like it happens elsewhere. When politicians create institutions, and then after they created the institutions, how do we fund it? When the South African Reserve Bank was created, the government couldn't quite put the money in. But during those days, every bank issued its own banknotes and the lots. And so, as part of taking away that power of the private banks to issue their own currency, they were also offered shares in the central bank. But everyone is limited to no more than 10,000 shares. And if maybe, Mills, you decide that, no, maybe I will buy 10,000 shares, I will get my family to also buy 10,000 shares, and then our family can then influence the central bank. No, we changed the law and said in the law, you cannot, with your family or associates, have more than 10,000 shares, so that you restrict that. And so we have put this information there. But I also have got to state that this discussion about the nationalization of the bank is not really our discussion. There had been central banks that had been nationalized before, and there are still central banks that have got some private shareholders. What is important is the institutional construct. So I'll give you an example. One of the most fiercely independent central banks is the Deutsche Bundesbank. It's 100% owned by the German government. Just across in Turkey, you have got a central bank that has got private shareholders. Yet the president of that country changes governors every so often because he thinks they are not doing what he would like them to do. So we need to distinguish between what the mandate of the central bank is, which is a constitutional mandate, and who actually has got shareholding in the central bank. And I must say that according to the Reserve Bank Act, after the bank had provided for all its requirements, it pays 200,000 rands to the shareholders, and whatever is remaining gets paid over to the government. So it is actually a very interesting setup because the government does not have the shareholding, but the profits of the central bank go to the government. Why? Because this central bank is owned by South Africans. It's not owned by those shareholders.
Governor, there's a question about your thoughts on a cryptocurrency and its potential regulation. That's the first question. The second question I'd like to ask is, if you could explain to us how the Monetary Policy Committee of the bank functions. You know, it's an important institutional structure, decision-making structure of the bank. How does it work? You know, how does it make its decisions on interest rates? If you could just take us through the process. What factors do you take into account? Do you vote? Do you make decisions based on consensus? And how does it work? But before you do that, just your comments on the cryptocurrency and its potential regulation. That is a question from Lindy Wedlamini.
The central banks do not believe there is such a thing as cryptocurrency. But we know that there are crypto assets. And there is a reason. For something to be a currency, it must meet the following three criteria. One, it must be an acceptable, generally acceptable medium of exchange. Secondly, it must be accepted as a store of value. And thirdly, it must be a unit of account. Well, you can tick and say that a cryptocurrency is a store of value. You can attach that. And then you can maybe tick and say that, well, it is accepted as a medium of exchange, but it's not generally accepted. It's only accepted by those who are participating in that. We actually take a view that we have released a discussion document. And in our approach to this is that we are going to have to regulate this because people go and invest in this. And when they lose money, they say, what has government done about it? We have almost had somebody in South Africa somewhere, a crypto exchange disappeared with the money, a couple of billions of people. And then the question comes, what is government doing about it? And so that is the one thing. Now, many of these crypto assets have got a technology that underlies them. And that technology is the blockchain technology. That technology can be useful in many other respects, but we have got to separate the technology from what it is actually being used for, being in this crypto space. And so, like many central banks, we have had an experiment with this blockchain technology, and we are out to market to look for the possible introduction of a digital currency in South Africa for retail use, because the bulk of the rand is actually digital. It is in the payment system. That is where it is going. And what many central banks are now exploring is a central bank issued digital currency to supplement the notes and coins. So that is the crypto stuff. Monetary Policy Committee and the decision-making process. We can have Monetary Policy Committee members up to 8. We don't have to be 8. It's just an internal terms of reference. But what is really the MPC is the governor and the 3 deputy governors. They then decide which staff members to make members of the MPC to assist the governors in their decision-making process. What you people do not see by the time we announce the MPC decision is a process, and maybe if you indulge me, let me just spell out this process. What happens is that we would check and say, what are the issues that would influence the forecast that we come with? Our model that we use for forecasting, like all economics models, does have assumptions. And so the process starts with the MPC members meeting with the Economic Research Department to agree on what the assumptions for the forecast are going to be. The two most important assumptions have to do with the oil price and the exchange rate, because they interact and they are very important prices, so they influence what is going to happen to inflation and also what happens to growth. And so once we have signed off on the assumptions, the modeling team in the bank will then put together a forecast of what they think growth is going to be, what they think inflation is going to be, and all of that. The MPC will then meet for 3 days. And on the first day of that meeting, we have got the staff assessment of the state of the economy, starting with the global economy, moving to the domestic economy, getting onto the global financial markets, domestic financial markets. And once we are done with those, we retreat in a small group. The first day, the group is just over 100 people. And then on the second day, what we then do is that we retreat as a small group, and then we debate the forecast. We debate the forecast, and once we have some view of the forecast and where we think it is going, every MPC member must go back overnight, think about what their take is going to be. I convene them, and then I will get the chief economist to say that here are the options. Here are the reasons why you should keep interest rates the same. Here are the reasons why you should hike them. Here are the reasons why you should cut them. And once he has done that, every MPC member will then say, based on my analysis and what I had heard over the past 2 days and what I have read, my decision or my preference is that we must do so many basis points in this direction or this direction, or we must keep the rates the same. And if there is a disagreement, we will debate and debate and debate. And if we can't convince each other, we will go with the preferences of the majority of the committee. And once that is done, the chief economist then puts together an MPC, a draft MPC statement, which is sent to all members of the MPC, and then everyone will come with their changes. We will debate that, debate every single word. We will debate where the comma should be and so forth. And by that time, Mills, you will then realize your English is more important than your economics.
All right. Governor, the next question is from one member of the audience about the regulation of fintech firms. And the question is, are there any plans to regulate fintech firms in the same way as banks are regulated? That's the first one. The other one is, good day, Governor. What are your thoughts on the view that the capitalization requirements by the Prudential Authority on banks and insurances are too restrictive, and how do you balance policyholder protection vis-a-vis changing structural dynamics in those sectors to enable increasingly informal sectors to participate in those sectors? Maybe that is clear to you. The one about fintech firms and the other one about the Prudential Authority on banks.
Okay, let's start with the fintech firms. No, we don't intend to regulate fintech firms like banks, no. But if it walks and quacks like a duck, then it is a duck. So if you are a fintech firm and you take deposits, we will regulate you like a deposit taker. If you are a fintech firm and you do money transmission, we will regulate you like a payment provider. If you are a fintech firm and you sell insurance policies, we will regulate you like an insurer. So our intention is not to regulate fintech firms, because our regulatory mandate is to regulate activity. So we will not be regulating a fintech firm, we will be regulating deposit taking, or we would be regulating money transmission, remittances, and so forth. That is what we would regulate. So if you are a fintech firm and you enter that space, we would regulate you in that manner. But it is important that we understand the value that the fintech firms bring to the financial space. One is that many of them have come up with solutions that are cutting the cost of providing financial services and so forth. And what we have done in the Reserve Bank was to create an innovation hub. And that innovation hub has got 3 components. It has got a regulatory guidance unit. So fintech firms can come there, and then we will guide them through the regulations. And then secondly is that we have got an innovation accelerator, so that if the thing falls within the regulatory space, that you can be helped to speed up faster. And thirdly, we have got what we call a regulatory sandbox, where we allow you to come and play around with the stuff that you want to do in a protected space, so that you can take your business to market. And that is how we are doing it with respect to the fintechs. The capital requirements by the Prudential Authority for banks and for insurance, is it too restrictive? No, it is not too restrictive. There is an international capital standard for banks. Is called the Basel framework, and that is what is used globally by all countries. That's what we had agreed to. And in terms of that capital adequacy requirements in terms of Basel, that is how we decide on the capital that the banks must hold. There is a standard also for the insurance, which is issued by the International Association of Insurance Supervisors, which we also follow. There is a reason why this is important. We have got to protect the policy holders, and we have got to protect the depositors. Why? You see, if we do not have depositors, there is nothing for the banks to lend with. So we check these things. The bank balance sheet has got both the deposits, and it has got the lending book. And if the lending book expands too fast relative to the capital of the bank runs into capital adequacy problems. And that is why we do these things. Same with policyholders. If you are a policyholder, you buy an insurance policy and say that in case I die, and I don't know how many years down the line you die, and then the insurance company can't pay because it didn't provide for enough capital, then it becomes a problem. That is why we do that. We then, though, decided that we would also like to promote second tier banks, and what you would have seen is that the most recent banking licenses have been banks that are very nimble. They do not have a huge branch network. They leverage on technology, and that is what is bringing in competition into the South African financial services industry.
Now, Governor, while we're still on that, I'll take a question, in that domain from Ketelo, and Ketelo says, A few weeks ago, Standard Bank, which is a commercial bank, fully absorbed Liberty, which is an insurance firm. This is common in South African financial firms where banks operate as commercial banks, investment banks, private equity funds, insurance brokers, etc. The global financial crisis was primarily caused by institutions that are too big to fail. South African banks are a textbook case of too big to fail banks where they introduce an unreasonable amount of systemic risk to the financial system. After the lessons of 2008 and 9, why do we still allow such too big institutions to exist?
That is quite a mouthful, and it mixes so many different things. Actually, the banks that were at the heart of the trouble in the global financial crisis varied. There was no common denominator that said that it is the banks that are in this manner that got into trouble. There were excesses, and the interesting thing that we had two questions. One said that you are too restrictive on your capital, and the other one saying that, well, we got into trouble because the banks were doing all of these things. Interestingly, that South Africa didn't have a banking crisis in 2008. Why? Because our banks were well capitalized, they had ample liquidity, and they were well regulated. That is what ensured that South Africa does not have the crisis that we saw in the advanced economies. Since then, on the global regulatory space, we had come up with what we had called ending the too big to fail phenomenon. And if we think the institution is big, there is a provision now that says that we categorize institutions as SIFIs, that means systemically important financial institutions. And the Financial Sector Regulatory Act does provide for the levers that the central banks have to regulate systemically important financial institutions. And that framework is out there. And if you are deemed to be a systemically important financial institutions, we make you to hold more capital than the other institutions. And capital, we know that is not cheap, and that is the disincentive of the institutions not being too big to pay. But also more importantly is that if you are a systemically important financial institution, we regulate you much more closely. We devote significant supervisory resources for such an institution.
Right. Thank you, Governor. Now I want to ask a question about the accountability of central bank governors. You know, you as central bank governors, you a very small, tight group, you know, of people you meet regularly, be it in the International Monetary Fund or the G20 or the Bank of International Settlements, and you discuss very important issues that have significant, global significance in terms of the economy. And some of your critics have raised concerns about this. You know, they say that you are a bunch of unelected officials, bureaucrats, you know, that make decisions without being held accountable for those decisions. So the question is, what is your response to this criticism, and how do you think central bankers can ensure that they are accountable for the actions? So, and whether in South Africa, is the bank being held sufficiently accountable for its actions? And the other question related to that, Governor, you meet with your colleagues regularly, and if you could just share with us among the central bankers that you have interacted with, who has impressed you most and why?
That will become, I'll tell you what the easiest answer will be to pick the ones who have already left and not the ones that are still there, so that I can still keep the friends that I have in the central bank community. Yes, the central bank bankers, we are unelected. Yes, we are technocrat. Yes, we have got a lot of power. That power, some author called it unelected unelected power. I don't think that we should have elected central bankers. I think it will defeat the purpose, because instead of focusing on the task at hand, they will focus on the next election. And it is in that construct that central banking was thus given to technocrats whose job it is to make those difficult decisions. And that is why you will find across the globe that you constrain that power, you set parameters for that power. Now, in setting out that, you say central bankers must act independently without fear or favor. The other side of preserving independence is actually accountability. We have got to be accountable for the decisions we make and the way in which we make those decisions. And part of it, Mills, when I was explaining to you that process, how we eventually arrive at an MPC decision, was to basically say there is a process structured here. If something goes wrong, we would still be able to explain, but we set out the process. This is what we thought. Where did things go wrong? We go to Parliament, actually next week on the 18th, we will be in Parliament virtually, of course, where we discuss the annual report of the South African Reserve Bank, which is a marvel to read, especially this year. And in that report, there is a report on monetary policy, on financial stability, on the operations of the bank, on the financials of the bank, and so forth. We account to Parliament in that manner. We would prefer to have a little bit more engagement with Parliament. And so far, it looks like we are engaged with Parliament once, maybe twice a year. One of the marvels to watch, by the way, Mills, is what is called the Humphrey Hawkins testimony in the US, where the chair of the Fed appears before that committee. It's a very rigorous process, and it's scheduled throughout the year. It's something that markets watch also very closely. It is accountability to the elected leadership in the US. And here in South Africa, we would like to have more engagement with Parliament, where we get asked questions so that we explain to the publicly elected representatives of our people what it is that we do as a central bank. But besides accounting to Parliament, we account to the public too, through our own public forums. We hold these monetary policy forums that we would used to hold in every province in the country, where we send MPC members and the staff of the bank to account to the South African public what we do. And but that said, the most important thing is that we must account to the publicly elected representatives of our people.
All right, and the that you're most impressed with?
Well, I would say my friend Mark Carney, and a part of it is that he holds the record of having been a governor of 2 different central banks. He has been governor of the Bank of Canada and governor of the Bank of England. Look, it's difficult to pick up. I picked up on him because we sort of like grew up together in the financial services area. I think that he's been a very good public servant. But the camaraderie of central banking is that when we meet, we talk about how do you deal with this in your country? How do you deal with this in your country? How do you deal with that in your country? And I had the privilege now of being made to chair what is called the Central Bank Governance Group of the BIS. And that is where governors come together and we pick up topics and say, how do you deal with this in your country? And we compare the nodes globally, and we would be able to say, colleague, you might be off the mark. This is where most people are converging, and so forth and so forth. It's actually a very nice club of public servants to be in.
Right, Governor. Now, I've got a question from Refilwe, who wants to know, Refilwe Sisane, to what extent does your Catholic faith influence the execution of your role and leadership? And then the other question is, could the governor please state whether the bank could have done more in relation to the debacle at WBS? There is some disquiet about a recently launched mutual bank. Your comments? And the other one is, can the governor expand on what it means to have balanced economic growth? Can growth be balanced with high inequality? So the first one about your faith, Catholic faith, and whether this has an influence on how you carry out your role as governor. And the other one is about, could you have done more to arrest the rot at WBS? And the last one is, how do you balance what it means, to have balanced economy? Can this be a balance with high inequality?
I don't know how if you discovered that I am Catholic. I am a governor of a central bank of South Africa, so I have to cater for everyone. Yes, I was raised a Catholic. I was raised by two very powerful Catholic women, my grandmother and my mother, who instilled particular values in me and taught me about telling right from wrong and what to do that is fair. And I think that it helped shape my value system. But central banking is about hard numbers, and religion is about following particular things. So if you have to make decisions here in economics, don't be religious about economics. You must beat the numbers until they confess, and then you can arrive at a decision. I think that I will leave it there. The thing about WBS, I'm constrained about what I could say about WBS because we have laid charges against the people who we thought were involved in WBS, and the matter is before the courts. Let me just say, though, that we do not run the banks, we supervise them. The banks are run by management with oversight of their boards, and the boards account to the shareholders. And very clearly, in that case, something broke in between. What the nature of that would be and whether there had been fraud, it's something that is before the courts that we think that will be ventilated in the courts, and I would leave it there. You said there were three. I've dealt with
what it means to have balanced economic growth. Can growth
what it means to have balanced
equality?
Well, this is exactly the point about balanced growth. You see, if you have got unemployment, your growth is not balanced. And that is why you end up having to watch these things. If you have growth and you do not take care of the environment, your growth will not be sustainable because you will soon run into all sorts of problems. And so that is what we constantly watch. And so you cannot have balanced growth in an environment where you have got price instability or you have got financial instability. Your growth will not be sustained unless you raise your potential growth rate and worry about those long-term determinants of growth and not become obsessed with just cyclical growth, which in South Africa, the debate when people talk about growth and when they start referring to, well, central bank must do something, that tells me they are stuck on the cyclical growth and not looking at the long-term sustainable growth.
Right. Now, Governor, I want to move on to the relationship between the bank and the Treasury. And you've had the privilege of having, before you went to the Treasury, you started in the bank, you went to the Treasury, and you came back to the bank. And you've said previously that the best training for your current job was the time you spent in the Treasury. Could you please just explain the importance of the relationship between the bank and the Treasury? And then also, if you may, you've had the privilege of having worked with the leaders, all our leaders since 1994. You're part of the class of 94. From Madiba, Thabo Mbeki, Jacob Zuma, and now the current president, also with the finance ministers from Derek Keys, Chris Liebenberg, Trevor Manuel. And, if you could just explain to us the relations, the working relations you had with these leaders. They're different leaders, different personalities. Did you have to adapt your personality yourself to ensure that you got on with, well with them? How did you manage to navigate these different personalities among these leaders, both the presidents and the ministers of finance?
The ministers of finance becomes very easy because in our construct, there is a legislative framework that governs the relationship between ministers and the Director General and the rest of the bureaucracy. But that said, it doesn't matter how much you legislate or you put codes in onto paper. What matters is people and the relationships that they actually develop. And I have had the privilege of working basically with all of these presidents. And I can tell you now that even if the current president calls me and asks me to come and brief him on something else, I still get nervous and I have to make sure that what I put is credible. And importantly, is that you got to try and understand that presidents do not have a lot of time. They deal with so many issues. And so one of the important skills you learn is to be able to be succinct in your arguments and make sure that by the time you leave with the decision that you were actually looking for. Of all these presidents that I had worked with, the marvel to work with was Thabo Mbeki. And he had this story where my predecessor as the DG of the Treasury went with the Minister of Finance and the governor. The rand was falling out of bed. And then they said that the rand will go past this psychological level. And then he says, DG, listen to me. I am not looking for a psychology assessment. Can you give me your economic assessment of what must be done? And I knew during those days that I always had to be sharp when I go and brief him. And but also that you knew that what you had to do was that if you put enough information that would support your argument, that your argument would carry. And I think that I've been able to do these things because my approach was always professional. I had always been conscious and aware of the politics around, and I decided not to play the politics and stay in my lane as a technocrat. And sometimes there were times with Trevor Manuel where he would say that that's a very good technical argument, but will it fly politically? And we would laugh. We would laugh at him and we say, black man, you are now on your own. We have given you the technical arguments. You can go and argue the politics. That is why you are there as a political leader. We are technocrats. We will give you all the technocratic arguments. And my advice to any of the public servants is, you must be able to put arguments that are cogent, that are dispassionate, that are backed by evidence, and not play the politics, because the politics is for those who are elected to play them. And of course, importantly, is that I would not change my recommendation of a decision. If I go to the president or I go to the minister and I said, this is the problem you are facing, here is my recommendation, I will not change that recommendation. I will record what the decision of the political principle is, so that if one day things go wrong, South Africans will know what was the technical advice and what was the political decisions. So, and I've been fortunate that in both the Treasury and in the Reserve Bank, I have worked with some of the finest economic brains that the country could have, and they are able to put options on the table. For this trade that we apply, that is called economics, is about trade-offs. And the tragedy of the South African discourse at the moment is that we think everything is a priority. And because we think everything is a priority, we cannot engage with society so that society understands that there are trade-offs to be made. And those trade-offs could be, is it this priority or is it that priority? It could be, do we do this today or do we do it tomorrow? And when somebody asked about the balance, one of the things that have to come with the balance and inequality, talked about inequality, is what I call intergenerational equity. That today we are making decisions which might sound good today, which put a burden on our children and our children's children. And so it is important that society understands the trade-offs that must be made when decisions have to be made.
Right, we're moving to the conclusion of our discussion, but just a few questions before we conclude, Governor. There are two questions I want to ask you about transformation, the state of transformation in South Africa. And one was triggered by, what happened at Cornwall High College. Your daughter goes to the school, Cornwall High College, or Hill College, and this was in the news recently. You are on record as having stated that there is systematic racism at the school and that its admissions policy deliberately limits the number of Black pupils. Without going into the specifics of the school, could you please just tell us, in your view, what you think the state of transformation is in South Africa in broad terms? The other issue on transformation relates to a statement that has been frequently made by, he's now the former Minister of Finance, Tito Mboweni, who's been very critical of commercial banks in South Africa. And essentially he's argued that they're anti-Black and he's argued very strongly for the establishment of a state bank to address the concerns, of black people in this country. He's put it in more direct terms than I'm putting it. But what's your response to that? Do you think South Africa needs a state bank? I know that the Reserve Bank, you own 50% of African Bank and the PIC, and some would say that is a state bank already. But your views on that?
Okay, I would not get into the debate with the former minister about whether the banks are racist or not. Just to say to you that until maybe 2 months ago, of the big 5 banks in South Africa, 3 had black CEOs. And I would struggle why black CEOs would choose to be racist against black people. So there might be other issues. I think I would not want to get into that. But when you say the state of transformation, transformation has got many facets. And what I had tended to look at is to say, where could one make the biggest influence? And in a way, I think that I had made a big influence too on the transformation of the financial sector. I got involved in the creation of the financial sector charter, which for me still set very fundamental transformative goals for the financial sector. And I'm talking transformation broadly here beyond ownership. I'm talking about the transformation of the sector. And I think that at that time, there wasn't even a single black CEO of a financial institution. And look at where we are. We still have some way to go. The other aspect for me of the transformation has to do with financial inclusion. And there are things, financial services that we take for granted, which people need to go about their daily lives. And South Africa has got a financial inclusion target. And I think that we have set ourselves a financial inclusion target of 80%. And I think we are at about 75% now. That is fundamental. It's better than many countries, including some of the advanced economies in terms of how far we have gone with financial inclusion. So the transformation, it will go through so many different things. Now, you asked, do we need a state bank? It's not for me. If the state thinks that it needs a bank, it must submit a banking license, and then we will subject the state to the application that all the other shareholders who want to create a bank go through when they are applying for a banking license. But can I leave this with you to say that the state is already the biggest financial conglomerate at the moment. It owns the continent's largest asset manager called the Public Investment Corporation. It has got the continent's largest pension fund called the Government Employee Pension Fund. We have got a special bank for industrial development. It's called the Industrial Development Corporation. We have got an infrastructure and municipal bank called the Development Bank of Southern Africa. We have got a retail bank called the Post Bank. We have got a housing bank called the National Housing Finance Corporation. And so when we say we need a state bank, which gap are we filling? They are all of those, but maybe the state thinks that there is a need for another bank. If the state feels there is a need for another bank, they must submit an application and we will adjudicate it in accordance with the Banks Act. And if they meet all the requirements of the Banks Act, we will license the bank.
All right, Governor, this will be my last set of questions before I hand over to our director, Professor Maurice Radebe. If you could just share with us, highlights of your career. You've been a stellar, distinguished, public service servant in this country for many, many years. You've served this country very well, and I'm sure you'll continue to serve this country in other capacities beyond the role of governor when you leave eventually. What have been the key highlights of your career? Have you had any regrets, during this career, this stellar career? And with the Reserve Bank now marking its this year, congratulations, by the way, its 100th anniversary. It's a timeless institution, 100 years old. What's your take into the future? With you, when you look into the future, where will the bank be in the future? What role do you think it will continue to play into the future? So your highlights, regrets, and then the future, and then after that, then I'll hand over to Professor Kganyago.
Well, I can tell you now that I have got absolutely no regrets. There might have been mistakes along the way. Hindsight is perfect. And in policy, there will be mistakes along the way, and what is important is to own up to those mistakes and what you had learned from that. I think that for me, just looking back, I had participated in a policy document called the Reconstruction and Development Program before I even came into government. I participated in the Growth, Employment and Redistribution Strategy. I participated in the Accelerated and Shared Growth Initiative of South Africa as GISA. And this country since then had seen the new growth path. It had seen the National Development Plan, and I do not know what other plan is now going to be coming. I think that what is in no doubt is that we do have thinking capacity, but we are running a serious execution deficit. And sometimes you run the execution deficit because you set yourself things that are just impossible to achieve. And it talks to what I was saying about a failure in South African policy discourse to frame the trade-offs, that we pick up an issue and we have become single issues society. So somebody picks up a policy issue and they want to run with it, and you say, but we can't afford it. And then they go and they say, if you do this and that, then we can afford it. They forget that there are other policy areas, and society must have a conversation about, if we are doing this, we are going to stop doing this because our resources are finite. And I do not think that even in my career, I have succeeded in getting the political leadership in this country to really frame those trade-offs. And as a result, we seem to give South African an impression that this country can do everything and provide everything and not have difficult conversations with society, that society must make choices. If I then think of my achievements, people do not know that the Treasury used to be 2 departments. I was given the responsibility to put that Treasury together. And I think that with the team then at the National Treasury, we built a formidable institution. We put together a budget process that today South Africa is ranked consistently in the top 3 in the world in terms of its budgetary transparency. And I could say that I did see those prices, those ratings come when I was there. And in the central bank's side, I think that we can say safely that the South African Reserve Bank would stand tall amongst a community of central banks around the world. I got so many awards and honors during the period. I don't think that they have to do with me, the individual, but more to do with the institution and the good men and women in the South African Reserve Bank who get up every morning to serve South Africans. I couldn't have asked for a better job, stressful as it is, that South Africans could have asked me to do for them, like the one that I am doing. I wouldn't change it for any other job. I am sure at some point I will reach my sell-by date and I will move to other things. But I have always been a servant of our people, and I think that I served them to the best of my abilities, to the extent that there might be things where I might have failed. It would not be because I deliberately did that, but a sure way to make sure that you will never fail is to not try to do anything. Then you can rest assured you will never fail.
Right, Governor Kganyago, thank you so much for those inspirational, illuminating insights, and for having shared those with us in such a transparent and honest way. We really appreciate your time. I would like to hand over to Maurice Khadebe, the director of Wits Business School, to provide the vote of thanks for this occasion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. Mills. First of all, let me thank you, the audience that has been there, and you've participated, very engaging, and it's always great that to see such a large number of people participating. So we thank you for being with us, and I'm sure you've gained a lot. I have learned a lot. I would like to also thank our VC, Professor Vilagazi. I always call him with his clan name, Sebinda Siyabonga, for supporting us at WBS. It's always great to have you, knowing that you are here as our leader. And I think we should give a round of applause for Professor Mills for first conceptualizing this and then engaging our speaker and then asking so much a robust question and really making the discussion so engaging and very, very interesting. Finally, I would like to thank our governor. This is wonderful to have you with us. I have learned a lot today from you, indeed. First of all, you know, the way you explain inflation with a loaf of bread, it's so simple, but not simplistic. And that's very important that we all understand your role. I remember very well, you know, if you've lived long enough like me, and especially in business, there was a time in this country where the inflation rate was 15%. And I remember the Reserve Bank took a decision that they will target the inflation and it will be below 6%. I remember saying, you know, I'm sure that you guys must be smoking something green, but you've done it. And I'd like to really give a round of applause for that. And you've preserved our rand, and our currency is regarded as a hard currency. And I know I've traveled the world. There are currencies which are not even worth a piece of paper on which they are written. So well done. And I also learned a lot from this noise about nationalizing the Reserve Bank. And when you reduce it to the fact that it's about a 200,000 rand issue that we're talking about, and the fact that the Constitution really guarantees the mandate, is really very helpful for all of us to understand that. So I'd like to thank you for dedicating your time. And you're right, you've been a real servant of the people, humble, doing your job for many, many years, and dedicating yourself to serving our nation with integrity, you know? And that is what I really like about you. And I haven't had anything all these years, you know. I haven't seen you on a paparazzi, Sunday World, and I haven't seen your name mentioned in Zondo Commission. You're a true inspiration to our young leaders, that it is possible to succeed and yet be a man or woman of integrity. So stand firm like that. You're a beacon of hope for all our kids from the villages and the townships, so that they can have alternative role models. I'd like to personally thank you as a head of school for honoring us, coming us coming to our school, and we are definitely going to be engaging you more and more, and we would like to develop a partnership relationship, whatever you want to impart to our young leaders, you know, our MBA students, our future leaders, our MM students, or our future leaders in business. And that's one of the reasons I'm here, just to impart the knowledge and experience. We will call you to come and speak to them on a one-on-one, because they need to hear people like you so that they can aspire to make a difference in our country. So all the best, stay blessed, and make sure that you remain healthy during this COVID time. And God bless you. Thank you very much. Bramils, over to you. We're closing now.
Thank you, everyone, and good evening. Thank you, Governor. Thanks for your time. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much, Prof. Mills.